किसी के लिए गर्व की बात है। अपने आसपास हमें अनेकों ऐसे उदाहरण मिलते हैं जिनसे पता चलता है कि बेटियां किस तरह पुरानी बंदिशों को तोड़ रही हैं, नई ऊंचाई प्राप्त कर रही हैं। मैं आपके साथ 12 साल की बेटी काम्या कार्तिकेयन की उपलब्धि की चर्चा जरूर करना चाहूंगा। काम्या ने सिर्फ 12 साल की उम्र में ही माउंट एकोनकागुआ उसको फतेह करने का कारनामा कर दिखाया है। यह दक्षिण अमेरिका में एंडीज पर्वत की सबसे ऊंची चोटी है जो लगभग 7,000 मीटर ऊंची है। हर भारतीय को यह बात छू जाएगी कि जब इस महीने की शुरुआत में काम्या ने चोटी को फतेह किया और सबसे पहले वहां हमारा तिरंगा फहराया। मुझे यह भी बताया गया है कि देश को गौरवान्वित करने वाली काम्या एक नए मिशन पर है जिसका नाम है मिशन साहस। इसके तहत वो सभी महाद्वीपों की सबसे ऊंची चोटियों को फतेह करने में जुटी है। इस अभियान में उसे नॉर्थ और साउथ पोल्स पर स्की भी करना है। मैं काम्या को मिशन साहस के लिए अपनी शुभकामनाएं देता हूं। वैसे काम्या की उपलब्धि सभी को फिट रहने के लिए भी प्रेरित करती है। इतनी कम उम्र में काम्या जिस ऊंचाई पर पहुंची है उसमें फिटनेस का भी बहुत बड़ा योगदान है। अ नेशन दैट इज फिट विल बी ए नेशन दैट इज हिट। यानी जो देश फिट है वह हमेशा हिट भी रहेगा। वैसे आने वाले महीनों तो एडवेंचर स्पोर्ट्स के लिए भी बहुत उपयुक्त है। भारत की जियोग्राफी ऐसी है जो हमारे देश में एडवेंचर स्पोर्ट्स के लिए ढेरों अवसर प्रदान करती है। एक तरफ जहां ऊंचे ऊंचे पहाड़ हैं तो वहीं दूसरी तरफ दूर दूर तक फैला रेगिस्तान है। एक और जहां घने जंगलों का बसेरा है तो वहीं दूसरी ओर समुद्र का असीम विस्तार है। इसलिए मेरा आप सबसे विशेष आग्रह है कि आप भी अपनी पसंद की जगह अपनी रुचि की एक्टिविटी चुने और अपने जीवन को एडवेंचर के साथ जरूर जोड़ें।
Thank you, sir, and good afternoon, everyone. At the outset, I would like to thank the I3 Foundation and Mr. Rajiv Gupta for giving me this wonderful opportunity to be among such accomplished mountaineers and get to share my journey with all of you. It is truly an honor to be here. My journey began a long time ago when I was still on a baby sling, and for as long as I can remember, I tagged along with my parents on small trails along the Sahyadris in Lonavala. Initially, I could only crawl up these trails, which subsequently turned into baby steps and created deep impressions on my mind. Missing my dad, who used to go on long expeditions in the Himalayas, I used to ask my mom what is there in the mountains that calls him back again and again every year. And my mom in turn said we should go and find out for ourselves. Thus began my journey with the mighty mountains of the Himalayas. Over the next few years, I did many treks in the lower Himalayas with my mother, venturing out on beautiful trails like Chandrashila Peak, Harkudun, and a back-to-back trek to Kedarkanta Peak when I was 8 years old, Roopkund, which was my first high-altitude trek and my first trek in the Himalayas with my hero, my dad. Many more Himalayan treks followed, like the Brighu Lake trek and the Sarpas treks in the summer of 2019. After gaining some experience in the Indian Himalayas, in May 2017, I had my first opportunity to seek an audience with Mount Everest when my mom and I traveled to Nepal to undertake the Everest Base Camp trek. After 7 tough days of trekking, we finally reached the biggest base camp in the world, and I had my first rendezvous with Sagar Mata. We unfurled the tricolor at the Everest Base Camp, and I made a promise to the mountain to return again and to climb all the way up to the summit the next time. With the experience gained, we traveled to Ladakh in August of 2017 to climb my first 6,000 meter plus peak, Mount Stoke Kangri. Earlier in 2012, I had traveled to the roadhead of this mountain to see off my dad when he had attempted her the first time. I had asked him then when I could climb the peak. And after 5 years of hard work and training, I was on the summit in the morning hours of 7th August 2017, just 3 days before my 10th birthday. And I became the youngest girl in the world to have climbed a peak above 6,000 meters. It wasn't an easy climb. Thank you. The climb on the summit day alone lasted 19 hours. It was in the foothills of Mount Stoke-Angry on returning from a successful summit that my mission was born. Mission Sahas is my endeavor to complete the Explorer's Grand Slam, an ultimate challenge in mountaineering, which involves climbing the highest peaks in all the 7 continents and skiing to the North and South Poles. It has only been accomplished by 75 mountaineers till date, of which only 14 are women. I hope to become the youngest ever to accomplish the feat. The current record is held by Japanese Marine Minamiya at 21 years of age. I set out on my first milestone of Mission Sahas, Mount Kilimanjaro, in October 2017 with my mother. After 4 tough days of trekking through varied terrains, we finally reached Gilman's Point on the crater rim of the dormant volcano and the world's highest freestanding mountain. I had reached the roof of Africa at just 10 years of age. Next on the list was Mount Elbrus, the highest peak in Europe, which is in Russia. After a cold and tough climb, we finally summited the peak on 14 June 2018 and completed my second of the 7 summits. It was special to be standing on the summit as a family just 1 day after my parents' 15th wedding anniversary. Not just that, I also skied down from the summit of Mount Elbrus. Can you believe that I climbed the peak wearing snowboarding boots, changed into ski boots at the summit and then skied down? But that's a story for another time. Next up was Mount Kosciuszko, the highest in Australia, which again was a mom and daughter affair. Kosciuszko is not a very high peak and is only a 1-day hike up and down, but we had to face extremely high winds when we were on there. But after a lot of hard work, we finally reached the summit on 23rd of October 2018, the only ones to do so on that day. With the third of the 7 summits accomplished, the next aim was to climb Mount Aconcagua, the highest peak in South America. Although Mount Aconcagua is not a very technically challenging peak, it stands tall at almost 7,000 meters, making the altitude an important defining factor in the outcome of an expedition. Also, its location way south of the equator and its proximity to the Pacific shores make it susceptible to extreme weather changes and high winds. Additionally, we also had to deal with extremely cold temperatures on the mountain. With a success rate of only 30 to 35%, many who attempt the peak are forced to turn back and descend. All this meant that we needed to train further and train harder. So we traveled again to my favorite playground, Ladakh, to climb Mount Mentor Kangri 2, a tough peak overlooking the beautiful Somoriri Lake. I summited my second 6,000 meter plus peak on 24th August 2019 at just 12 years of age. With a successful climb on this mountain reassuring my preparedness, we were confident to take on the challenges of Mount Aconcagua. But when we reached Argentina, we had to face a whole different battle before we could even leave for the climb. Due to changes in the legal requirements in Argentina, we had to fight a case in their family court to get a permit for me. After almost 2 weeks of fighting relentlessly, we finally got our permits and left on the climb. Though we were climbing strong right from the beginning, our guides were very cynical about taking such a young climber on the expedition. And so we faced our next challenge on the 11th day of our climb as we were moving to our summit camp. Being a windy day, my hands were freezing, so we stopped a couple of times to warm them up and change our gloves. The guides took advantage of this to label it as signs of high altitude sickness and forced us to turn back. Despite repeated attempts to try and tell them that I was fine and was totally normal, they forced us to come down all the way back to base camp. But on the way back, I found courage and told my dad that we were not turning back because of our own shortcoming, but rather because of someone else's misjudgment of us. That gave him the confidence to reason out with our expedition operator and get me one more chance to prove my grit. So when I was given that second chance, I gave it everything I had, and we finally reached the summit on 1st February 2020, my 4th of the 7 summits completed. I also became the youngest girl in the world to climb the peak at just 12 years of age. During the next 2 years of COVID restrictions, I had to keep my focus, discipline, and continue to train hard. Finally, after the lockdown restrictions eased out, in June 2022, we set out on my fifth of the 7 summits, Mount Denali, the highest in North America. Located in the remote Alaska, this is rated as one of the toughest climbs of the 7 summits. The base, Kahiltna Glacier, can only be reached by a small aircraft with specialized ski landing gears from where our expedition begins. Since there are no porters on the mountain, we had to carry not only our own 20 kg backpacks, but also a 50 kg sledge with all our food, equipment, and other things for the 20-day expedition. Here are a few glimpses from our beautiful, yet challenging and extremely dangerous climb. The mountain was full of deep crevasses and steep slopes where we had to drag our heavy sledges. Ironically, these slopes were harder to come down with our sledges than go up. You would also be surprised to know that this picture was taken at 11:30 in the night. The sun hardly sets for about 2 hours so high up near the Arctic Circle and gave us plenty of sunlight to walk throughout the day. This is the view of the summit from Camp 4. What seems so very close in the picture takes us almost a week to climb. There were a few stretches of our climb that were literally on the edge, and we had inched forward through 5 camps and finally set out on our summit push. But before we could have an audience with the summit, we had to encounter a sharp knife ridge nearly after 8 hours of climbing. A huge mass of ice can be seen right at the top of the ridge, just waiting to dislodge itself at any given moment. After a long and tough climb, we finally reached the summit of the 6,190 meter high Mount Denali on 27 June 2022, my fifth of the 7 summits completed at 14 years of age. With this, eyes were set on the next milestone, Mount Everest, and a rigorous 2-year-long sojourn began. But before I'd move on, I'd like to call my climbing partner for the next segment of this presentation.
Hello everyone, good morning to all of you. It's my pleasure to join the young mountaineer today to take the presentation forward. Now, climbing Mount Everest is a serious endeavor. Every climber has to be Everest ready. If you're not Everest ready, you're endangering yourself and you're endangering the others on the mountain. So we had to prepare everything to the last detail. Physical strength, mental strength, logistical preparations, so on and so on and so on.
Preparation for a climb like Mount Everest takes perseverance and discipline over a long period of time. In April 2021, I underwent my basic mountaineering course at the National Institute of Mountaineering and Allied Sports in Arunachal to hone my technical skills.
We had to constantly train to improve our lung capacity and endurance, both of which are absolutely necessary to climb Mount Everest. And the only way to do that was take to running.
We took complete advantage of being so very close to the Sahyadris and ventured out on many treks to strengthen our legs and get used to walking on the rough terrain.
And when we couldn't hit the hills, we took to stairs literally wherever we could find one, including our own building where we stayed. And we've also been training in Gulmarg for the last 10 years for cold resistance. It's nearly become a kind of a pilgrimage for the entire family to visit Gulmarg every year.
Earlier this year, I also participated in the Khelo India Winter Games in the ski mountaineering events and clinched a gold and bronze in 2 different disciplines. I believe it is our training regimen which ragged in these results.
And for actual training on the mountains, we set out to climb Mount Kaamya 1 as a pre-Everest expedition. It's a highly technical mountain towering 6,401 meters in Ladakh.
As you can see on the screen, we trekked through many beautiful and unique landscapes throughout our climb. We also climbed up steep slopes with long and never-ending technical sections. But all our efforts paid off when we reached the summit of Mount Kaamya 1, my 5th summit above 6,000 meters on 11 September 2023, and I became the youngest person to summit the peak.
With a successful summit and all the previous training endeavors, we believed we were finally ready for Mount Everest now. Alongside all the physical and mental preparation to sustain the expedition on Mount Everest, we also had to prepare logistically, get the right equipment, find the sponsors, talk to the right expedition operators in Nepal, and choose the best suited itinerary, so on and so forth, a never-ending list. And while you can't carry unlimited resources on the mountain, you had to cater to every single exigency that can be encountered on the mountain. So that's the depth of planning required to undertake an expedition as exhaustive and long as Mount Everest.
We were finally in Nepal after all of this preparation on 3rd of April this year, and with blessings from Lord Pashupati, we set out on our climb on the 6th of April.
The expedition on Mount Everest can be broadly split into 3 phases: the approach phase, the acclimatization phase, and the summit. The approach phase sees the climbers climbing from Lukla, a small village in the Khumbu region, all the way to the base camp, which is around 3,350 meters high and stretching almost about 1.5 kilometers long.
There are 4 camps beyond the base camp on Everest. During the acclimatization phase, we progressively climb up to Camp 3 at a height of about 6,800 to 7,000 meters. This is done gradually to let the body adapt to the rarefied atmosphere. Once the acclimatization cycle is over, climbers rest and recuperate at the base camp, awaiting opening of the most suitable window for the summit push. You might be surprised to learn that the summit of Everest is continuously swept by jet winds at speeds of 150 to 200 kilometers per hour. These winds move away from or above the summit only for a few days every year, and this is the only time when mere mortals like us can stand on the summit. So climbers time their final push all the way from the base camp to the summit to catch this small window. After all the preparation, we finally started out on our trek from Lukla on the 6th of April. The scenic route to the base camp winds along the gushing Doodh Koshi river, originating from Everest, and is laced with a mesmerizing landscape. We had a few nostalgic moments recreating pictures on the hanging bridges across the river. We also had gifts to deliver. When I had trekked to the Everest base camp back in 2017, I was deeply moved by the difficulties faced by the Sherpa children just to reach their school in the harsh terrain, and I wanted to be of some help to them. With the help of my mother's school, Naval Kindergarten, Fly Dubai, and our expedition operator, we managed to gift a pair of good school shoes to about 50 students from the Sir Edmund Hillary School in Khumjung. It was really heartening to see the beautiful smiles on their faces. After 8 days of trekking, we finally reached the Everest base camp on 13th of April.
This campsite, sitting on a moving mass of ice, was going to be our home for the next 2 months. The next day was the puja, where all the Sherpas gather and all our climbing gears are brought out, and Lama performs a puja to bless the equipment. It's very sacred for the Sherpa community, and more importantly because we are asking permission from the mountain for safe passage to its top and back to the base camp. You can also see in the previous picture that there were offerings ranging all the way from Coke to Sprite to the high spirits. So whatever is available in the high mountains are offered to the deities to give us safe passage.
In the following days, we sharpened our climbing skills at the nearby ice pinnacles. The training to cross huge crevasses using ladders was a first for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
And once we were comfortable with the altitude of the base camp, we headed out for our first rotation on the mountains to Mount Labuche East, 6,119 meter high peak in the Khumjung region. After reaching Labuche on 17th of April, we set out on our summit climb the very day in the evening.
The summit push turned out to be much tougher than we'd expected because of a lack of fresh snow, which resulted in us having to climb the steep slopes on either rock or hard blue ice. But after nearly 8 hours of climbing at 8:40 on the 18th of April this year, we reached the tricky and narrow summit, which couldn't accommodate more than 2 to 3 climbers at any given moment, and I had summited my 6th 6,000er.
After the summit of Mount Labuche East, we were back at base camp to prepare for our next rotation in the mountains. On 22nd of April, we headed out into the much feared Khumbu Icefall for our first time. The Khumbu Icefall is a mystic out of the world landscape that distinctly distinguishes the climb from the Tibet side and from the Nepal side.
But I wouldn't say it was scary, it was majestic and serene. But perhaps our preparation had drastically reduced the fear surrounding the icefall in our minds.
We climbed about half the distance of the icefall to acquaint ourselves with the terrain, and we returned back to the base camp, and we felt that we were now prepared for the multiple trips that we were going to take through the icefall in the coming days.
On rest days and bad weather days at base camp, we took lessons on the crucial oxygen system and practiced climbing with our oxygen cylinders and masks on.
The next rotation up the mountain saw us climbing all the way up the Khumbu to Camp 1. The icefall revealed itself in all its glory, and here are a few snippets. We can see that the length and width of the huge cracks, crevasses, which can be more than even 50 meters deep at places. Was not what you see when you climb. This is exactly what you see when you climb. All the vision narrows down to tunnel vision, and you are absolutely alive with the dangers around.
And that is Camp 1, tiny yellow dots lining the vast end of the vast snowscape called the Western Kum. Those lines that you can see near the camp are the deep cracks in the snowfield that we call crevasses.
The journey continued to Camp 2 the next day. Crevasses only grew larger, much more precarious. In the picture you can see climbers finding their way on top of a snow bridge, waiting to fall any time. And as I told you earlier, the depth of the crevasses could be ranging anywhere from 30 to 50 meters.
On reaching Camp 2, we had a much needed rest day before moving on with the next segment of our acclimatization. To keep ourselves engaged, we played quite a few games of chess, and it was interesting to see how our brains were performing suboptimally compared to even just base camp.
The next day, we left at 4 in the morning to climb towards Camp 3. The idea was to climb as far as the sun hit us and then turn back. Camp 3 is set up in the middle of a long and continuous steep slope called the Lhotse face.
We reached the bottom of the Lhotse face after about 3 hours of climbing, and then continued to climb about 1 hour on the Lhotse face before returning to Camp 2 and then returning directly to base camp the next day. Our bodies had now completely acclimatized.
After we got back from the third rotation, it was just a game of waiting for the window to open up for the summit push. Since we had 2 weeks of time, we thought it's better to go down on an oxygen holiday. So we headed down to Pangboche, a village at the tree line. The body recovers much better and faster when you are able to breathe oxygen coming out of the greenness around.
After 4 days of recovery at Pangboche, we got back to base camp just in time for our summit push. Before we set off from the base camp, we were each allotted our individual Sherpas who would guide us throughout the mountain. We also had recaps on symptoms of high altitude sicknesses and how to tackle them, discussed personal oxygen strategies, as well as the route beyond Camp 3.
With good wishes and loads of good preparation and loads of good wishes, we finally set out on the summit climb. Unlike the acclimatization rotation, you can see the traffic had started right from the beginning of Khumbu. What took us probably 10 minutes to reach the earlier day took us about an hour and a half when we were actually on the summit climb.
After a rest day at Camp 2, we moved to Camp 3. This was an exciting day because we were using our oxygen cylinders for the first time on an actual climb. I was feeling strong and reached Camp 3 in just about 3.5 hours.
Just to give you all a perspective of how much the body had changed and what change it brought into the timing. On the first rotation, it took us about 4 hours to reach the bottom of the Lhotse phase. And this time we reached it in about 2.5 hours. And we reached Camp 3 in about another hour and a half. So that's what acclimatization had done to our body. From Camp onwards, we had to wear oxygen systems while even sleeping in the tent. Although it was, put on a lower flow rate to save the oxygen.
The next day, we moved from Camp 3 to Camp 4. While we faced extremely high winds and constant whiteouts like you can see from the video, and a lot of people turned back, we endured through the bad weather. And we finally got to Camp 4. It was certainly one of the toughest days of the expedition for us.
Camp 4, the South Col was certainly out of the world, view from the outer space. An uninhabitable environment with about 50 tents and people moving around wearing down suits, even the Sherpas wearing masks and carrying oxygen cylinder along with them. This is a video shot the next day after we reached, when the weather had calmed down much better. The day we reached, we just had to head right into the tent the moment we reached Camp 4.
We were supposed to rest at Camp 4 for a few hours and then leave on our summit push at around 9:30 in the night. This would ensure that we reached the summit around sunrise and return safely. But with nightfall, the winds hadn't died down and we could barely get out of our tents. After waiting till about 1:30 a.m. in hopes of the weather clearing up, we finally slept, hoping that we would be able to go up the next day. But at 3:30 in the morning, our Sherpas woke us up and said that we would be leaving on the summit push now. We were very surprised because such a late start is absolutely unheard of on Everest.
I even talked to the operator at the base camp to clarify whether it was a right decision to think of going out at this time of the morning. The climb was supposed to start at 9:30 the earlier day and we were already at 3:30. The best that we could get out is at 4:30 in the morning. So what would happen to the turnaround time? What would happen if the weather goes bad? So many things playing on our mind, and both of us climbing the mountain with our loved ones waiting for us back home. It was a very, very difficult decision to take.
But our expedition operator assured us that it was the right decision to take, and if we were to move out the next day, we'd be stuck in a long line of about 200 plus climbers who were coming up from Camp 3 that day. So we set out on our summit push, and as we kept moving, I pushed ahead while my dad got stuck in some traffic and some extremely bad weather. Though we got split up, faced some really bad weather, and had a tiring, long climb, we braved through these challenges and finally stood on the highest point of the earth in the afternoon of 20th of May. It was a dream of many years coming true for both of us, and it felt amazing to have achieved it. Though we couldn't get a clear view from the summit due to the bad weather, it was definitely a very special moment. I had become the youngest Indian and the second youngest girl in the world to climb Mount Everest from the Nepal side.
सबै त मेरो केही देख्दैन
but we want to make sure that you all get to see the real view of the summit. So here's a video that we borrowed from one of our co-climbers on the mountain. You can see how precarious the routes are and the actual stay on the summit is.
But we were rewarded for our successful summit with an amazing sunset that we got to watch as we were making our way down to Camp 4 and then further to Camp 2 the same day. And with these climbs, I also hold the records for being the youngest girl to climb Mount Aconcagua, the youngest girl to climb above 6,000 meters, and the youngest to ski down from the summit of Mount Elbrus. In recognition of my mountaineering potential, I was honored with the Pradhan Mantri Bal Shakti Puraskar in 2021, the highest award for citizens below 18. During my virtual interaction with our Honorable Prime Minister, he told all the awardees that this award should only act as a stepping stone to even more success in the future, something I promise to always remember and follow.
The road ahead is not easy for Kaamya. Kaamya hopes to climb Mount Vincent Massif in Antarctica this December to become the youngest girl to complete the 7 summits and, if possible, ski to the South Pole as well in Antarctica.
This would only leave the North Pole as the final challenge for the Explorers Grand Slam. I hope to complete this in 2025 at 17 years of age and become the youngest to accomplish the feat. Before I end, I would request all of you to keep us in your prayers and follow me and my adventures on my social media handles and keep encouraging me. Lastly, I would like to thank all of you for giving me this wonderful opportunity and being a great audience to my story. My dad has always said that we should climb mountains to collect stories that we can tell our grandchildren when we retire at an old age. Well, I've had a bit of a head start and would want to wait till 60. So thank you everyone once again for being a wonderful audience to my story.